The young and the restless spoilers shock. For decades, Victor Newman had been a titan in Genoa City, a man whose name commanded respect, whose fortune could sway empires, and whose family, despite endless scandals, remained the central axis of his world. The Newman legacy was not merely about billions or boardrooms, it was about control. Power over narratives, destinies, and bloodlines. For all his cunning and ruthlessness, Victor's one blind spot, his true Achilles heel, had always been his deep, almost obsessive devotion to the people he called family. Nicky, Nick, Victoria, Adam, Abby. To Victor, they were not just relatives, they were extensions of his empire, the pillars of a dynasty he had spent a lifetime crafting. But while he stood atop his empire with pride, a storm had been brewing beneath his feet, one so calculated, so venomously personal, that when it finally struck, it would not just shake Newman Enterprises. It would dismantle the myth of Victor Newman, piece by humiliating piece. And at the heart of that storm stood a man whose name Genoa City had only begun to whisper, Aristotle Dumas. Dumas didn't arrive with bluster or threat. He came with invitations. Charm. Diplomacy. His demeanor masked his vendetta so thoroughly that even Victor, with all his wariness, failed to see the danger. But Dumas was not interested in stealing Victor's money or toppling Newman Enterprises from the outside. No. What he wanted was far more intimate, far more devastating. He intended to destroy the very foundation of Victor's identity, his family. And the first domino he needed to fall was Nicky. Breaking up Victor and Nicky was no easy feat. They had survived affairs, alcoholism, business collapses, and personal tragedies that would have shattered any normal couple. Though they often lived apart, drifted in and out of infidelity, and wielded betrayal like a weapon, the one truth they had always returned to was each other. 30 years of chaos had somehow cemented them. Which is why, for Dumas, the only way to separate Nicky from Victor wasn't through temptation or lies, it was through truth. Weaponized, horrific truth. Dumas had spent years gathering information, biding his time, infiltrating every crevice of Newman history. He paid off lab technicians, bribed old private investigators, hacked into paternity databases long buried in hospital archives. What he unearthed wasn't just scandalous, it was apocalyptic. DNA records. Old paternity test fragments. Medical inconsistencies buried in the early 80s. Dumas didn't need to create fiction, he merely had to unearth reality that had been smothered for decades. What if Victor Newman, the self-proclaimed patriarch of a legacy, had been raising another man's children all along? Victor had always suspected Adam's motives, had questioned Abby's loyalty, but never, not once, had he truly allowed himself to question the bloodline of the two people he had trusted the most, Nick and Victoria. He had tested Nick once, discreetly, many years ago, and the results had reassured him. Nick was his. A sigh of relief. But Victoria? He had never dared. Perhaps it was denial, or a silent hope that the animosity between them was simply a clash of egos. But Dumas saw the chasm for what it was, a fracture in identity begging to be shattered. And now he had the proof. It began with a carefully orchestrated leak, an anonymous email to Nicky, attaching an old, yellowed lab report. A follow-up envelope delivered to the Newman ranch, addressed in the handwriting of a long-dead nurse. Then a package delivered to Victoria's assistant, wrapped in sleek black paper, containing nothing but a USB drive and a note, "Ask your mother." It wasn't just chaos, it was psychological warfare. The documents showed that Victoria's paternity was not only in question, but that Victor Newman had never been her biological father. The man whose legacy she had bled for, fought for, warred against, had never shared a single drop of blood with her. And worse, it implicated a name no one expected. A man from Nicky's past, long buried, long forgotten, now resurrected as a ghost with devastating relevance. As Nicky stared at the evidence, the photos, lab records, the timeline she could no longer deny, her world began to rupture. Every lie she had ever told Victor, every time she had begged forgiveness or claimed devotion, now felt hollow. Dumas didn't need to seduce Nikki. He had handed her a blade and let guilt do the carving. She had betrayed Victor long ago, and now, the reckoning had arrived. But it wasn't just the guilt that consumed her. It was the realization that Dumas had known all along, and that he had waited for this exact moment to strike. Victor was the last to know. As whispers swirled around the executive offices, as Victoria shut herself off from the family, and Nikki slipped into a spiral of anxiety and vodka, Dumas made his move, publicly. At a corporate gala honoring Newman Enterprises' legacy, Dumas took the stage not as a guest, but as a harbinger of doom. Before a sea of flashing cameras, he offered a toast to the strength of truth over myth, and with a slight smirk, handed Victor an envelope in front of everyone. Victor opened it. A DNA test. Victoria, 0% match. Signed, verified, timestamped. The silence that followed was cataclysmic. Nikki's trembling hand reached for Victor's arm, but he didn't flinch. He just stood there, stone-faced, betrayed, humiliated beyond words. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. Newman's stock plummeted the next day. Board members demanded answers. Victoria vanished from the public eye, issuing only a vague statement about needing time. Nick, reeling but still Victor's son, became enraged, toward Dumas, toward Nikki, toward everyone. The media erupted with speculation. Had the Newman dynasty been a lie all along? Was Victor just a glorified stepfather living in denial? But Dumas wasn't done. He didn't want Victor bruised. He wanted him broken. He visited Nikki in private, not to mock, but to sympathize. Feigned empathy was his deadliest weapon. He told her that Victor would never forgive her, that the world already saw her as the weak link, that perhaps now she could be free. He planted doubts in her mind like seeds in poisoned soil. And Nikki, ashamed and spiraling, began to retreat from Victor. Not out of anger, but out of shame. Dumas didn't separate them through seduction. He separated them through truth that reeked of betrayal. Victor, once so composed, now turned paranoid. He ordered new DNA tests. He rechecked Nick's paternity. He grilled Nikki, berated Victoria, and questioned everyone's loyalty. He started sleeping at the office. Drinking more. Trusting less. Dumas had succeeded, not with a bullet, not with blackmail, but with precision exposure. He hadn't just pulled the rug out from under Victor. He had set fire to the floor beneath him. But the true masterstroke came weeks later. Dumas held a press conference, one that no one saw coming. He revealed, with quiet but unwavering resolve, that he was in possession of a letter, handwritten by Nikki decades ago, where she confessed that she had always known the truth about Victoria's father and had chosen to keep it secret because Victor needed an heir. He read the letter aloud, pausing only when Nikki, watching from home, collapsed to the floor. And in that moment, Victor Newman, a man who had survived enemies, hostile takeovers, assassination attempts, and more betrayal than any one life should endure, finally understood what Dumas had taken from him, his certainty. Now, for the first time in his life, Victor stood alone. Not without people. But without trust. His wife, unforgiven. His daughter, estranged. His legacy, tainted. And as he stared at the Newman crest hanging in his office, he no longer saw pride. He saw a monument to illusion. Dumas hadn't just ruined his family. He had rewritten the story of Victor Newman. And the ink was still wet. Let me know if you'd like this story continued, rewritten in a different tone, or extended into another chapter involving retaliation, Adam's reaction, or even Victor's plan for revenge. The moment the DNA test slipped from Victor Newman's trembling hands and landed on the cold marble floor of the Newman Tower atrium, a silence consumed the room so absolute it felt like time itself had frozen. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. All eyes remained locked on the man who, for decades, had stood as the unshakable godfather of Genoa City's power elite, now pale, swaying, and betrayed in front of the entire city. His chest heaved not from rage but from the sudden, searing pain slicing through his ribcage. Victor clutched at his heart, his face contorting in a mixture of disbelief and agony. His world, once so meticulously curated and defended, was collapsing in real time. But even as his knees buckled slightly, Victor Newman, ever the warrior, refused to fall. He forced himself upright, gripping the edge of the podium, sweat collecting at his temples, eyes wide but unblinking, as though sheer willpower alone could push back the truth. It was too late. Victoria's wail cut through the room like a blade. "No. This can't be real," she screamed, stumbling backward, her heels echoing on the polished floor as she clawed at her hair. "You're my father. You've always been my father." Her voice cracked under the weight of a lifetime of devotion, conflict, and identity now rendered meaningless. For Victoria, who had fought tooth and nail to earn her place in Victor's empire, who had bled for Newman Enterprises, endured his favoritism toward Adam, and still carved out her own legacy, this revelation wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was a theft of self. Everything she had believed about herself had been obliterated in a single document. Her screams, raw and unfiltered, echoed off the walls, ricocheting through the stunned audience of executives, reporters, and loyalists. But the next blow came not from the DNA report, but from the woman who had stood beside Victor through decades of infidelities, breakdowns, and reconciliations. Nikki, frozen in place, eyes glistening with the panic of long-buried guilt, suddenly dropped to her knees. She covered her mouth with trembling hands before tearing them away and blurting out words that shattered whatever fragments of illusion remained. "It's true," she choked, her voice barely audible at first but growing louder with every syllable. "I knew. I've always known." Gasps erupted around the room. She turned her tear-streaked face toward Victor, who stared at her as though she were a stranger. "I lied to you. I lied to her. I thought it wouldn't matter. That if we just moved forward, no one would ever know." Victor didn't speak. He couldn't. His entire body was locked in place, one hand still pressed to his chest as if trying to contain the rage, the sorrow, the physical pain of betrayal all at once. His mind reeled. Nikki, the one person he had forgiven more sins than he could count, had carried this secret for over 3 decades. She had watched him raise Victoria. Watched him discipline her, guide her, clash with her, mourn with her. All the while knowing that the daughter he was fighting so hard to mold and control was never his to begin with. He had built his legacy on a lie. Not a business misstep, not a PR scandal, but a lie so intimate it tore through the very marrow of his soul. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters scrambled, flashing cameras stuttered like gunfire, and Newman executives murmured nervously, unsure whether to flee or watch history being rewritten. But amidst the confusion, Dumas stepped forward, calm and collected, holding in his hands the final match to ignite the inferno. "I didn't just come here to expose a betrayal," he said smoothly, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. "I came to give you the name of the man Victor should have feared most, not his enemies, not his rivals, but his best friend." He turned slowly, deliberately. "Victoria's biological father is Paul Williams." The words struck like a lightning bolt. Screams erupted. The floor seemed to vanish from beneath Victor's feet. For decades, Paul had been Victor's friend. His confidant. The man he trusted implicitly. To learn that Paul had not only slept with Nikki but fathered her child, Victor's child in name only, wasn't merely betrayal. It was desecration. Nikki let out a guttural cry as Victor finally stumbled back, his face drained of color. He might have fallen, might have collapsed completely, but even now, in this unbearable moment, pride kept him upright. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was surgical. The child. The friend. The wife. all conspiring in a secret that had lived beneath his roof, across his dinner table, for over 3 decades. Dumas smiled, not with joy, but with the cold satisfaction of a man whose revenge had reached its apex. He had done the impossible. Severed the bond between Victor and Nikki, shattered Victoria's identity, and humiliated Victor before the entire city. And the cruelty lay not in falsehood, but in the painful truth. Nothing Victor could say or do would undo the damage. The truth had already rooted itself in every headline, every whisper, every boardroom conversation. The man who had built an empire on legacy had just discovered that legacy was borrowed. In the aftermath, security scrambled to restore order, but it was no use. The story had already broken. Social media was ablaze. Every news outlet was running with the footage. The New York Times ran a special bulletin. Victor Newman collapses amid family scandal. CNBC flashed a cheerin', Newman dynasty implodes. Inside Newman Tower, Victoria had fled, sobbing uncontrollably as Nick tried to comfort her, equally horrified but determined to anchor the family through the storm. Nikki remained kneeling, her sobs turning into whispers, repeating, "I thought it wouldn't matter. I thought it wouldn't matter." Victor was taken into a private wing of Memorial Hospital shortly after, where doctors treated him for what they called a stress-induced cardiac episode. Not a full-blown heart attack yet, but dangerously close. Even lying in a hospital bed, oxygen tube in his nose, Victor stared blankly at the wall, the room quiet except for the beeping monitors. His empire was intact. His fortune untouched. But his soul? His soul had been annihilated. And still, Dumas wasn't finished. He would wait for the next opportunity, to release the footage of Nikki and Paul's confession, to push Victoria into a spiral of depression, to tempt Adam with the opportunity to seize control while Victor was physically and emotionally incapacitated. He would begin leaking internal Newman documents, sowing doubt among shareholders, and continue pressing the narrative that the emperor had no heirs, only impostors. Because for Dumas, this was never about money or power. It was about vengeance so personal, so poetic, that it had to be executed in stages. And this stage, the unraveling of Victor Newman's family, had been nothing short of perfection. Would you like the next part to continue into Victor's retaliation? Victoria's spiral? Nikki leaving town? Or Dumas' next move against Nick and Adam? I can build this further based on your direction.